Really quickly, we have the point of the needle on one end and the eye of the needle is on the opposite, and that's where your thread will go. Embroidery floss is different than plain thread because it is made of 6 different strands, and what is nice about that is you can separate them. Generally into 3 and 3 strands is a good thickness for most projects, and you just want to make sure to pull slowly so that you don't get any knots or snags and you end up getting 2 times the floss. To use a needle threader, first you put your threader through the eye of the needle. Then your embroidery floss is going to go onto the hook of the threader. You carefully pull the needle off and the thread through. You need to make a knot on the opposite end of your thread from the needle, and you start that by wrapping loosely around your finger to make an X. Put your thumb in the center of that X, squeeze your fingers together as you roll the thread off, and then carefully pull down. The nice thing is this should be a pretty chunky knot that will hopefully not pull through your fabric. A running stitch is a basic stitch that you can use for many projects. You want to make sure that you're starting from the back of your fabric so that the knot does not show. And when you pull all the way, then go and make your stitch through the front as long as you want that to be. You want to try and keep the space in between your stitches as even as possible, and the best thing to do would be to try and make those spaces the same width as the stitch themselves. That'll make everything look nice and neat. I'm also stitching along a line that I've drawn to give myself a guide so that I know it's a nice straight line, and I've used a pen that is erasable with heat. So there's water erase or ones that air erase as well, but that way it just kind of helps you stay on track. Now I'm using a running stitch to create the shape of a heart. I'm still getting that dashed line and going from front to back of the fabric. You want to make sure that you're using a guide to keep your shape nice and clean. Again, something that is erasable is best. A back stitch starts off the same as a running stitch, where you come from the back and go back through the front. And your second stitch, instead of going forward, you're actually going to go back into the same hole that your previous stitch ended at. The reason for this is to give yourself a solid line instead of that dashed line. Again, to try and get your stitches as evenly spaced as possible is nice to keep everything looking tidy. And again, I also am using a drawn line to make sure that my stitches stay nice and straight. It can be really helpful, but even if you go off of that line, it's good to have one that is erasable just in case. When you're using a back stitch to create a shape, it's really important, if you have something rounded, to keep in mind that shorter stitches are going to help you keep that curve looking really good. If your stitches are too long, then you are bound to have a shape that looks very choppy. Once you've finished stitching whatever shape you need, you want to secure your thread. So you turn your fabric to the back and put your needle underneath a couple of stitches that are nearby where your thread is. Pull the thread, but not all the way through, until you have a loop, and put your needle through that loop, and then you're going to pull tight. That's one single knot, and you want to do that a second time in the same place. Making a double knot will help to make sure that the thread stays secure and that first knot doesn't come undone. After, you want to just give a quick little snip of your thread, and don't cut right next to the knot either, because you might end up cutting your work. If you make a mistake, you can pick back your thread. Here I had not put a double knot in yet, so I'm just using my needle to get underneath the stitches and pick the work backwards. If you have a knot, you can use a seam ripper to cut that and then pick back. Once your thread is all out, you just pick off the little frilly bits and you're ready to try again.